Like, share and subscribe for more videos.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Author's Preface. When so many translations of, and commentaries on, the Holy Quran already exist, a desire for spiritual blessing and grace is not in itself sufficient justification for undertaking a fresh venture in this field. The effort will only be worthwhile if it fills gaps left by earlier works, or satisfies some unmet need felt by those interested in studying the Holy Book. The present work is neither directed at scholars and researchers, nor is it aimed at assisting those who, having mastered the Arabic language and the Islamic religious sciences, now wish to embark upon a thorough and elaborate study of the Quran. Such people already have plenty of material at their disposal. Instead, it is intended for the lay reader, the average educated person, who is not well versed in Arabic and so is unable to make full use of the vast treasures to be found in classical works on the Quran. For this reason, many subjects prominent in the more technical works of Quranic exegesis have not been treated. The principal aims throughout have been to help the reader to acquire a clear grasp of the Quran, to clarify ambiguities which he may encounter in his study, and to solve problems which may arise in his mind. It is for the reader to judge how far these aims have been achieved. Literal translation has been abandoned in favor of a relatively free interpretative rendering of the Quran. This does not imply any objection to literal translation as such. Several distinguished scholars have already used this approach admirably. For example, the translation of Shah Wali Allah in Persian and the translations of Shah Abdul Qadi, Shah Rafi-ud-Din, Maulana Mahmud al-Hassan, Maulana Ashraf Ali and Hafiz Fath Muhammad Jalandhari in Urdu. For this reason, little useful remains to be done in this sphere. There are, however, certain needs which are not, and cannot, be met by a literal translation, and it is to these that this work seeks to respond. Literal translations of the Quran tend inevitably to lack literary force, fluency, eloquence, and stylistic charm. Such lifelessness is incapable of either arousing the reader to ecstasy, stirring his being, making his eyes flow with tears, or raising a storm of emotion within his soul. Literal translations often leave one doubting whether the original book could indeed have been that which challenged the whole world to produce another like it. What filters through is merely the dry husk of its contents, stripped of all literary enchantment. The violent, soul-shaking spirit which permeates the original text is thus evaporated into thin air. This is a serious drawback, for the literary force of the Quran plays possibly as important a role in conveying its message as the teachings themselves. It was the literary quality of the Quran, a quality acknowledged even by its opponents, which first melted the hearts of its opponents, and shook the length and breadth of Arabia like a thunderbolt. Another reason why literal translations fail to inspire the reader is the manner in which they are set for printing. Either the interlinear style is followed or, according to a more recent fashion, a page is bisected and the Quranic text is printed on one half of the page, with the translation on the other half. This practice certainly has its uses, but its drawback is that the reader, being unable to read passages with continuity, often fails to receive their full impact as chunks of Arabic constantly interrupt the flow of his reading. Most English translations of the Quran make particularly lifeless reading because, following the biblical pattern, the translation of each verse is numbered, and begins on a new line. Take any piece of great literature, break it into fragments, put one sentence over another, give each one a number, and then try to read it. It will soon become obvious that the impact is nothing like that created by reading a coherent and continuous text. A further important reason why literal translations of the Quran tend to be ineffective is that the Quranic style is oratorical rather than narrative. If the translator retains the original oratorical style, rather than replacing it with straightforward prose, passages are bound to appear somewhat incoherent. It is well known that the Quran was not originally revealed as a set of written treatises. What actually happened was that various discourses were revealed to the Prophet, peace be on him, in the context of the circumstances and problems which he encountered in the course of his mission. And these he delivered to the people in spoken form. Oral language and style naturally differ greatly from written composition. For example, suppose a person were to write something to clarify a misunderstanding. He would first have to refer explicitly to the misunderstanding, then say things which might clarify it. But a man delivering a speech for the purpose of clarifying that same misunderstanding would not need to make specific reference to it. For his audience would consist largely of the very people concerned. Again, an orator may often switch from one grammatical person to another, while referring both to himself and to his audience. He will sometimes mention his audience in the third person, while at other times address them directly in the second. He may similarly alternate between the singular and the plural. He will sometimes speak on his own behalf, and sometimes on behalf of a group of people. At other times he will speak if representing some power on high, and on yet other occasions that power will speak through his tongue. This undoubtedly makes speech more effective, but when that speech appears in book form, an element of incoherence is bound to be noticeable. The farther one is removed from the original context and environment, the greater the sense of incoherence. This explains why people who do not fully appreciate this fact and, despite their knowledge of Arabic, complain of a lack of coherence between various parts of the Quran. Since the Quran is literally the word of God, it would obviously be sacrilegious to add a single syllable to the original text, even with the intention of enabling the reader to have a better perception of its inner coherence. Hence, the only service that Quranic scholars can render to Arabic-knowing readers is to provide explanatory notes wherever needed. However, when we attempt to convey the meaning of the Quran in another language, it seems justifiable to take a little liberty, though exercising the utmost care and circumspection, and replace the oral by the written style, thereby easing the problem of those who have difficulty in perceiving its inner coherence. As already pointed out, every surah of the Quran is in fact a segment of speech, revealed at a certain stage of the Islamic movement. Each revelation was occasioned by the demands of certain circumstances, and had certain purposes to fulfill. Every surah is so vitally linked with its situational background and its circumstantial setting that anyone reading a mere verbal translation, divorced from its context, would fail to appreciate many of the points being made. It therefore also seems reasonable to occasionally add a few words in such a way that the translated text reflects the situational context, even if only to a very limited extent, and thus renders the passages more comprehensive and more meaningful to the reader. A final problem with literal translations is that even though the Quran was revealed in clear Arabic, it also has its own special terminology. It often uses words with meanings other than their literal ones, and this in itself may give rise to many ambiguities. Take, for instance, the word kafr, which in the Quranic usage has a different meaning not only from its ordinary Arabic linguistic usage, but also from its terminological connotation in the works of later theologians and jurists. In addition, the word is not used uniformly in the same sense throughout the Quran. Sometimes it denotes a state of absolute lack of faith, and sometimes it signifies merely rejection or denial. At other times, it is used for an attitude of ingratitude and thanklessness. It is also used to denote non-fulfillment of certain requirements of faith. Yet again, it is used in the sense that, despite the profession of faith, a person's life at a practical level essentially exhibits rejection and disobedience. The same word is further used to signify external obedience unaccompanied by true inner conviction. If we were invariably to use the word kufr in a language such as Urdu, in which it is currently in use, or its equivalent in other languages, the translation would doubtless be correct. But it might fail to convey the full import of the original, it might even give a wrong impression, or create unnecessary confusion in the mind of the reader. Consideration of these shortcomings has led me to attempt what I would prefer to call an explanatory or interpretative exposition, rather than a literal translation. In other words, I have not tried to render the Arabic text of the Quran into another language. Instead, I have tried to express in my own words, and as faithfully as possible, the meaning conveyed to me by the Quranic passages and the impression they make upon me. As far as the form of the work is concerned, I have tried to ensure that this translation does not make dull reading or lack literary elegance, and that it reflects something of the force and candor of the clear Arabic of the Quran. I have also tried to help the reader to appreciate the natural continuity of the various parts of the Quranic surah, so that as well as embodying the meaning and purport of the Word of God, this work also mirrors something of its majestic grandeur and literary brilliance. I have prefaced every surah with careful notes on the period of a particular revelation, the circumstances obtaining at the time, the stage through which the Islamic movement was then passing, and its chief needs and problems. Moreover, wherever specific background information is relevant to the understanding of a particular verse or group of verses, such information is supplied in the explanatory notes. In the explanatory notes, every effort has been made to avoid distracting the reader's attention from the Quran itself. These notes have a twofold purpose: first, to elucidate and clarify, and, second, to highlight the spirit and aim of the Quranic passages. The reader is advised to go through the introductory sections of each surah before beginning to study the surah itself, and to refer back to them even during his study. Muslim readers are further advised to go through whatever portion of the Quran they usually recite each day, along with any literal translation of its meaning. Then to read our interpretative rendering of the same passage without reference to the notes, focusing on the passage as a whole. Only then should they proceed to study it verse by verse, reading the explanatory notes as well for a more thorough understanding. It is hoped that such study will enable the ordinary reader, God willing, to acquire a considerable, if not scholarly, understanding of the Quran. This work was begun in Muharram, 1361 AH, February, 1942. The work continued for just over 5 years, during which time interpretative rendering and explanatory notes were completed up to Surah 12. Then several events, occurring in quick succession, not only prevented me from proceeding with the work, but even from revising what had been thus far accomplished. In October 1948, by a stroke of luck, good or bad, I was arrested under the Public Safety Act and imprisoned. I was thus able to find the time needed to prepare this work for the press. I now pray to Allah that He may fulfill the purpose for which this work was undertaken, and make it useful for developing a better and fuller understanding of the Holy Quran. New Central Jail, 17 Dhul al-Qa'dah 1368 AH. The 11th of September 1949. Abul Ala Maududi. Like, share and subscribe for more videos.